Imagine that you wake up one day stranded on a deserted island, surrounded by nothing but endless ocean and silence. That's not too bad, right? But what if you then realize that there is something far worse than hunger or loneliness with you on the island, and it is hunting? This is the nightmare for survival that this young woman found herself, and she must find a way to escape or be the next meal for the monster. The opening scene of the movie shows an underwater view of an ocean which slowly transitions to the surface. Then, we see a girl named Jenn, who is unconscious by the beach. As soon as she regains consciousness, she notices Brad, her friend, lying nearby and also unconscious. When she reaches his side, she turns him over only to find a piece of coral embedded in his stomach, and he is barely alive. Jenn is terrified at the idea of losing him, as she tries to call out for help, but she obviously gets no response. In her quest to get help, she removes her backpack and life jacket, then drags Brad farther onto the shore. Then, acting quickly, she removes the coral from his abdomen and uses her scarf to apply pressure to the wound. Hoping to find something to help him, she runs into the jungle where she finds a coconut. She uses a stone to cut it open and hurries back to Brad. But as she tries to pour the coconut water into his mouth, she realizes that Brad is already dead. Just then, we see an aerial view of the island, which was completely desolate and surrounded by a narrow stretch of beach with dense forest in the center. In the meantime, Jenn, who is completely heartbroken, slowly completes a walk around the island and eventually returns to Brad's body. Afterward, she goes into the jungle where she finds an open space. There, she finds a bag hanging from a tree and a red cooler. She immediately becomes excited, thinking that there are other people there as well. However, when she calls out, no one answers. And as she looks inside the cooler, Jenn finds some bottles of Coke, and as she continues forward, she sees across a thermos flask and a small tin case. The tin contains a deck of cards, a pack of matches, and other items. And as she searches nearby, she discovers an abandoned tent covered with a canvas, and under it was a backpack. Inside the bag, she finds an old Game Boy, a car radio, a book, and a teddy bear. Eventually, Jenn returns to the beach where she hears a noise coming from a hollowed-out tree. But when she looks inside, she sees that it was just a tropical bird. She eventually decides to cover Brad's body with some fronds, and that night, there was a heavy downpour that forces Jenn to seek shelter under some fronds as well, as she uses her jacket for added cover. The following morning, she finds some fishes washed ashore. But as she goes to pick them up to eat, she sees a mutilated shark with deep gouge marks. This made her wonder for a while what could have caused such damage. But then, hunger kicks in, and in her attempt to make food out of the fishes, she tries to clean the fish with a flat stone, only to get frustrated and give up. Moments later, she returns to the cooler and her sparse belongings. As she looks at her diary, she realizes the water has washed away all the ink. However, she is able to retrieve a photograph of herself and Brad, and this immediately triggers painful memories. Later on, while exploring the jungle, she stumbles upon a burial site with 3 graves, and this sends chills down her spine as she quickly heads back to the beach. In the meantime, she sees that Brad's body has started to decompose, and this made her dig a shallow grave to bury him. She even marked the spot with a piece of wood, and that evening, she managed to roast some fish for dinner, as her survival instincts finally kicked in. The next morning, during her usual walk around the beach, Jenn discovers Brad's grave has been desecrated as she sees that his body is mutilated and dragged into the jungle. Horrified by the sight, Jenn sharpens a stick to use as a weapon as she ventures into the jungle to investigate. However, she finds nothing there. The following day, Jenn notices something in the distance while walking along the beach. Determined to see what it is, she swims toward the object as she sees that it's only a bucket and box. Then, as she tries to see if anything was under the ocean bed, she dives into the ocean and to her horror, she discovers a mysterious black hole on the ocean floor instead. Shocked at the sight, she hurriedly takes the box and bucket back to shore. Inside the box, she finds a pair of sneakers and some clothes, and that evening, she changes into the dry clothes and puts on the sneakers. She even set up a fire, and sitting by it, she opened the tin box again. Inside it, she sees that there is another compartment that contains some photos. But before she could look at them, she heard the sound of an airplane overhead. Excited by this, Jenn scrambles for the flare gun, but her first attempt to fire it fails. However, the second try is successful, and the flare lights up the sky. She waits anxiously, hoping to see some response, but her hope only turns to terror as she spots a humanoid monster rising from the waters in the distance. Horrified at the sight, she rushes back to her sitting area, grabs her makeshift weapon, and runs into the jungle. She eventually finds a spot to hide as she tries to stay still as she hears the sounds of approaching footsteps. Eventually, the noise died down, and the monster retreated, leaving Jenn shaken but alive. The following day, Jenn returns to the beach, and this time, she examines the photos. That is when she sees that it was a picture of a family, and in one of them, she sees a woman holding the same bag Jenn had found hanging from a tree. Then, in the background of this photo, Jenn notices 2 glowing dots, which she immediately realizes must be the monster's eyes. Now desperate to escape from the beach, She devises a plan as she empties the box and places her and Brad's life jackets inside, as she attempts to turn it into a raft. But despite her multiple attempts, the makeshift raft proves too unstable to support her weight, leaving her frustrated, as she throws the life jackets back onto the beach. That night, Jenn decides to seek refuge inside one of the hollowed trees as she clutches her weapon tightly and anticipates the monster's return. Sure enough, the creature arrives, and Jenn holds her breath as it rolls the tree trunk with her inside. She remains silent and unmoving, and after a tense few moments, the monster leaves. The next morning, Jenn emerges from her hiding spot with a renewed determination to bait the mysterious monster, as she catches a small shark and hangs it on a tree to lure the monster. She then hides nearby to watch. But just as she dozes a little, she hears a snap, and by the time she looks, the shark is gone. When she examines the frayed ropes the next day, she suddenly spots something floating in the water yet again. When she goes out to retrieve it, she discovers that it is a mutilated body, cut in half and unrecognizable. She eventually improvises once more, as she hangs the half body in the same way as the shark, hoping to draw the monster out again. That night, from her hiding spot, she observes the creature approach, take down the body, and retreat into the ocean. Just then, she hears the sound of an airplane engine overhead once again, but the sight of the monster's feet nearby brings her back to the danger at hand. So, she is forced to remain silent until the creature leaves, and by then, the plane has already disappeared. At dawn, Jenn used the canvas she had found earlier to construct a hanging bed high in the trees to serve as a makeshift watchtower for her at night. Unfortunately, there is a thunderstorm that night, but even at this, she keeps watch. She scans the area for the monster until a sudden flash of lightning illuminates the creature below as it immediately locks eyes with her. Frightened by the sight, Jenn tries to lie completely still, hoping the monster will retreat. However, the monster suddenly pulls on the hammock, making Jenn fall to the ground. Although she is injured from the fall, she is determined to survive as she tries to run away from the monster. So, she quickly grabs her weapon and runs to the beach. But in a flash, the monster bursts out from the water as it lunges at Jenn, but she manages to stay ahead of it. After a tense chase, the creature finally stands face to face with her. The monster immediately attacks as it throws her aside, and before she can recover, the creature kicks her into the water. In her terrified state, she searches for the beast only to realize that it has disappeared once more. Now fully exhausted from the fight, Jenn retreats to the jungle to try to regain her strength. But as she assesses her injuries and bathes in the ocean the next morning, she spots a raft on the horizon. At first, she wonders if she's imagining it, but soon she realizes the raft is real. Overjoyed at the sight, she takes off her shoes and swims toward it, where she sees that on board the raft are her friends, Mia and Lucas. When they arrive on shore, Jenn embraces Lucas and cries in relief while Mia looks around, glad to finally be on land. Grateful to see familiar faces, Jenn prepares a meal of roasted fish, coconuts, and the coke she found earlier. Seeing land for the first time in days, Lucas and Mia admire the island's beauty, but Jenn tells them about her encounters with the monster as she urges them that they need to leave as soon as possible. But the two didn't believe her, and even though she showed them the photographs, Lucas suggests that they should wait to see if anyone else arrives, while Mia speculates that Brad might still be alive. That is when Jenn revealed to them that Brad is dead, as she informs them that she had buried him on the island only for the monster to dig him up. Devastated by the news, Mia walks away as Lucas presses Jenn for details about the creature. So, she describes it as a massive monster with 2 glowing eyes and a distinctive foul smell. When she returns, Mia tries to persuade Jenn of the futility of escaping the island on the raft, as she tells her that she has no idea how difficult life on a raft could be. Jenn, however, insists she would rather risk dying on a raft than staying on the island. Left in frustration, Jenn walks away to find Lucas, as she once again suggests to him that heading west may be their best option since she's seen many airplanes flying in that direction. Jenn tells him that maybe one of the planes might spot them. But Lucas doesn't respond, until he finally admits that he needs time to process all the details. Even at this, Jenn asks him to trust her, and though still hesitant, Lucas agrees. She then borrows his Swiss Army knife, and tells him that she's going into the jungle to gather more food for their journey, as she reminds Lucas to tell Mia to get ready to leave. However, when she returns with the fish, Lucas and Mia reveal that they've decided not to leave the island, at least not that night. And despite Jen's pleas that they must go, they refuse, and Jenn eventually walks away to calm herself. She then enters the water to take a swim as she sees Lucas and Mia walking away together. So, she quickly returns to the shore and packs supplies into the cooler, along with the flare gun. Then she quietly heads to the raft, trying to make sure neither Mia nor Lucas sees her. But when she starts pushing the raft into the ocean, they notice her and rush over to stop her. They eventually engage in a struggle, as Jenn kicks Mia in the face only for Mia to hit back with a paddle, knocking her unconscious. When Jenn eventually regains consciousness, it is already dark and she is tied to a tree. Nearby, she sees Mia sitting on a log, as she tells her that Lucas has gone to survey the island. Then Jenn pleads with Mia to untie her, insisting that she isn't lying about the danger they all face. However, Mia continues to dismiss her, as she even reminds Jenn about her history of fabricating stories in the past. Moments later, Lucas eventually returns and assures them that he found nothing during his exploration. When Jenn asks him to untie her and promises that she won't do anything reckless, Lucas uses the opportunity to confront her as he blames her for their predicament. He tells her that they wouldn't be stranded in the first place if she hadn't acted reluctant during their boat ride. Although Jenn tries to calm him down and tell him not to dwell on the past, Lucas presses on as he accuses her of planning to abandon them. He then questions how she expected to survive by herself if she did manage to escape from the island. However, as they continue to go back and forth in their argument, a sudden scream interrupts them as Lucas grabs a burning log from the fire and runs to investigate, only to find that the monster has Mia in its grasp, and as Lucas hits it with the torch, the monster drops Mia. The beast eventually hits back at Lucas before diving back into the water. In the meantime, Jenn struggles to free herself from the ropes, and once she manages to cut them, she grabs her weapon and rushes to help. But as Lucas desperately tries to save Mia, who is stuck in the water, the monster resurfaces and pulls Mia deep into the sea. At dawn the next day, Jenn climbs down from the tree where she and Lucas spent the night and tells him to do the same. But he hesitates in fear until Jenn reassures him that she has never seen the monster during the day. Reluctantly, he climbs down and together, they head to the beach where they catch some fish, smoke them, and pack their belongings as they board the raft. Jenn gets into the raft first, as Lucas pushes it away from shore. However, when he starts paddling, they hear a sudden sound as the monster's hand swipes at Lucas from the water. So, he quickly scrambles into the raft as they secure the cover, and Jenn grabs their weapon. Moments later, the monster bumps the raft from below, with its movements visible through the floor. Suddenly, it pierces the bottom and thrusts its head inside. Although Lucas fires the flare gun, he misses the first shot but manages to hit the beast with the second as it momentarily retreats, and they try to relax. However, the monster comes up once more and grabs Jenn and drags her into the ocean. But as it pulls her to the depths, Jenn manages to stab it with Lucas's knife until the monster releases her and sinks into the waters. But just as Jenn struggles toward the surface, she realizes Lucas has dived in an attempt to rescue her. Unfortunately, the monster intercepts as it grabs him, then drags him into the black hole on the ocean floor. Heartbroken at the sight but exhausted from all the fights, Jenn swims back to shore, where the raft also washes up. She manages to reignite her fire that afternoon as she begins writing a memoir of her time on the island as proof of her harrowing encounter. Jenn is now determined to bring an end to the nightmare, as she gathers sticks and sharpens them into spears. She also exhumes the bodies of the family buried on the island and crafts weapons from their bones. That night, she attempts to lure the monster out of the water with fish, and then surrounds it with fire. And as the monster approaches, Jenn strikes as she stabs it with one of her spears before retreating into hiding again. And when the monster tries to search for her, she rearms herself with more sharpened bones and strikes again, as she manages to wound its leg, but this time, the monster hits back as it slammed her against a tree. Dazed but still determined to continue, Jenn sees that the monster is bleeding from the injuries that she has inflicted. So, she retrieves a hidden weapon along the beach and stabs it once more just as the creature lunges at her. She continues to repeat the pattern of stabbing the monster, but despite her efforts, the beast eventually grabs her by the head in a crushing hold. But in a final act of desperation, Jenn manages to pull a sharp bone from her pocket and repeatedly stabs the monster in its chest. The creature eventually drops her, and as she crawls away, Jenn initially tries to escape, but then she gathers courage and turns once more to face the beast. However, as she steadies herself for another attack, the monster lets out a final scream and falls down dead. Jenn then approaches the carcass and cuts off its head just to be double sure that the monster is truly gone. In the end, as she walks away victorious, the camera pans out to reveal that the jungle is still burning from the fight that symbolizes the end of Jenn's terrifying ordeal. And that's the story of the movie, Sweetheart. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment for us. Until next time, stay safe.